we come in with a personal mind, and our personal mind is largely conditioned by our life, by our peers, by everything that's happening to us. But it's also, in Tibetan Buddhist view, largely a result of karma. All the things that we've done in our past lives, there's karmic ripening. So a lot of things that are going on in this life are a result of things that have happened in choices we've made and actions we've done in previous lives. So all of that is kind of combined to create a certain way we look at the world, a certain view. And very often that view is more of a selfish view, because intrinsic in our conditioned personal nature is the desire to be happy. So most of our life is spent pursuing things that we think are going to make us happy, or pushing away things that we think will not make us happy.
Today we're speaking with Ani Lodro Palmo. She is a Tibetan Buddhist nun who has devoted her life to serving others. Her journey she describes as the first half of life full of futile pursuits and indulgences, an effort to become somebody, and the second half of life as a deconstruction and the dissolution of the first half to become nobody. It's a story that mirrors the essence of Buddhism, which we will very much capture and dive into in this story and this conversation. And today we have the privilege and honor of sitting with Ani and hearing her story. So thank you so much, Ani, for being willing to speak with me and tell me all about you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really an honor to have you here. Yeah, it's been wonderful to just get to know you a little bit.
The first question I really wanted to dive into was this first half and the second half of your life. Was there a moment that signifies that transition for you? Where did that kind of begin? Could you give us some context on that path for you?
Yeah. That's a very kind of bottom line summary of the first half and the second half. Of course, there's so much more that happens in this. I'm 62, so in the space of 60 years, a lot happens. But the reason I kind of talk about it like that was, or is, and I'll just give you kind of the history in a kind of condensed way. So when I was very young, I had that spiritual bent, that kind of sense of connection to nature. I was very curious as to who are these people that we see in church? Who is this person, Jesus? And I always kind of felt a very deep connection to my Catholic upbringing. And that was kind of, and years between maybe 5 when I started going to church and like 10 years old. So there was that period of time where I wanted to be a nun. And I was wanting to understand what happens when we die, because it's around that time that, you kind of come into the realization about death. You don't really know anything about death before that. And I had, of course, there's people in the family that die or your pets die, and I wanted to understand that. So that became something that became a very deep meaning inquiry for me, that what happens after we leave here? Because it seemed like nobody talked about that very much, and nobody knew. And there's this kind of, in Catholicism, there's a understanding of heaven and hell, but somehow it didn't kind of gel for me. I couldn't really resonate with it. So, I had that early time, and I also had some psychic abilities and some clairvoyant abilities. And I didn't understand what that was, and nobody around me seemed to have that. So there was all that going on, and it's probably very typical for a lot of children to have those. We come in and we bring a lot of the attainments that we had before into this life, and then as we grow, which definitely happened for me, between schooling, education, peers, environment, parents, just our entire world, our culture, our Western culture, all of that kind of fell away. My connection to Jesus, my wanting to become a nun, my deep wanting to understand spirituality, spirit. And I just became more and more indoctrinated into the Western culture mind, which is pursue these things and then your life will unfold in a happy way. And the things to pursue are, for us, money, status, people liking you, you know, material gain to a large extent, and then the approval of other people. So I grew up like that, as we all do, and so I became very conditioned in that way. And more in my, you know, as I went through high school, then I went to college, then I went to grad school, and I spent a lot of time pursuing a material world. And that was my world. It was all about, you know, having a great job and getting the next raise and having enough money, and buying this car and having this, you know, it was just the kind of the pursuit of, I guess, I don't know if we still call it the American dream, but 50 years ago, I guess, or 40 years ago, it was still called that. And then, you know, I attained some of those things. I had the job that people thought I should have. It seemed like I was doing a lot of things that other people wanted me to do. It's like, okay, the life you want looks like this. And I just said, okay, and went that way. And I became very self-centered. I was extremely selfish. You know, everything was about me. Everything was about what can I do? What can I do to make my life better? What can I do for me to be happy? What is it that's going to be like the next thing to attain? My whole world revolved, or, you know, I was like the center of my universe. And so there was a deep kind of emptiness inside me during that entire time. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it because I kept trying to brush it away. But by the time I got into my late 20s, my early 30s, where my career was more kind of like, I had a real, you know, kind of, there was acknowledgement I got for what I had attained in my career and money and whatever. But I felt deeply inside hollow. It was like none of those things, you know, there was a certain point, I guess when I started coming into my early 30s, where that all seemed very surface. Everything just started to look very superficial to me. And I had the recognition, the realization that I was deeply unhappy. I wasn't fulfilled at all. And what appeared to other people as this great life, to me, brought depression, anxiety, stress. And there was something really missing. There was something completely missing. And when I was 35 years old, I had, you know, all of that kind of material world that seemed in place. And I started reading Course in Miracles. And somehow there were things from reading that touched kind of that deep remembrance of spirituality from an earlier age. And I looked inward really probably for the first time since I was very young. And it dawned on me that this wasn't the life that I wanted at all. And so at the age of 35, I gave away everything I owned. And I left kind of my blood family and my job. I just quit. I walked out of my life, basically. And I, at that time, had met a teacher, a spiritual teacher. And she was my first teacher. She had been with Hindu teachers herself, and she had awakened through Hindu teachers. Hadakandi Babaji in India. She was also with Amaji. And when I met her, I just had the sense there was so much love coming from her. There was this presence that I had not seen in anybody else. And I just had that recognition, this is how I want to be. I want to be someone that has love inside me. And that was the pivotal moment, meeting her. I went to a retreat. I didn't know her, but I just signed up for a retreat. And there was this retreat that she was putting on. And in that retreat, I had a lot of recognitions, mostly about how unhappy I was. I finally was able to just admit, my life is not what I want it to be, and I'm very unhappy. And so at that point, you know, as I said, I walked out of my life, and I had nothing. And I I didn't care. I didn't care that I didn't have anything material-wise, and there were a lot of friends and relatives that were looking at what was happening and saying, what's the matter with you? Maybe you need a therapist, or maybe you need to get some help. But I had so much conviction inside that I just knew whatever happens, I'm going to put all my eggs in this basket. And I was with her for 19 years. She started an organization, a nonprofit organization. And she was pretty much the first person that told me, the spiritual path, enlightenment, is a path of letting go. It's a path of transcending the material world. It's a path of unbecoming, unraveling, purification of the ego. And so, for that first 35 years, it was all about creating personality and creating a life and creating ego. And then from that age of 35 on, once I was with her and I started studying with other teachers as well, it was all about unraveling that ego. It was all about purification. It was all about serving other people. My path from the age of 35 on was a very, what is called in Hindu bhakti and karma yoga. So the bhakti would be very devotional. You are just very devoted to your teacher and your lineage, and you're also doing karma yoga, which is selfless service. So anything you do, you're not really wanting personal gain from it. You're doing it as an offering to your teacher, to the lineage, as a way to help purify your own selfishness and self-centeredness. And little by little, in that 19 years, that first 12 years was, although I didn't see a lot of change in myself in terms of spiritual change, I couldn't say I'm awakened, or there was no feeling of I was enlightened at all. But what did happen was I became a nice person. I went from being a selfish person, and then during that first 12 years, there was again the deeper and deeper realizations of wanting to care about other people. And I didn't really truly care about other people prior to that. It was only after I started my spiritual path that I could even see other people, be interested in what was going on for them. Is there some way I can help this person? And then that kind of went on. And I'd say by my 12th year, I was kind of a nice person. Like people could talk to me and I was interested in them and I was patient and I could hear what they were saying. And I had a love for other people that I hadn't had before, not in the same way. And then after the 12th year, there was that kind of realization of emptiness, I would say, which is so much talked about in Tibetan Buddhism. And that was the first time that I had a very direct, lasting spiritual experience, kind of almost a transcendence of this kind of earth realm. And then a lot of things clicked in after that, because up to then, it was just all about how I behaved, my conduct, and how I interacted with other people. And I thought my life was going to be about just helping other people. I didn't realize that the spiritual experience was actually a transcendence of going beyond what we experience here, and even going beyond our own personal mind. So for that second half, that next from, kind of 5 to 35, I guess, and from 35 to now, it has been very, very much a falling away until there was that realization almost of a no self. Like, wow, there isn't really a personal self here that I'm interested in. And I think spiritual experience comes down to very much what we realize and then become interested in or not interested in. And I wasn't, about 50, 55, that decade of my 50s, I was really no longer interested in attaining in a personal way. I wasn't even interested in myself. There was nothing here that was kind of directing my attention towards, more of a subjective place. It was really more about the vastness of everything and having that spiritual connection, which flows very well into Tibetan Buddhism.
I love how you said it was almost like ever since you were a kid, when you wanted to grow up, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? A nun. Like, I just think that's amazing, and following that path eventually is just so cool.
Yeah.
So I was curious, back in those days when you said you had those clairvoyant instances and you were psychic, can you detail some of that for us as well? I'm so curious about those things. I feel like right now my intuition's really spot on with the Aquarius new moon and the Tibetan New Year, all of that. So I'd love to hear about how your experience was.
Yeah. I guess as early as I could remember, I had kind of a sense of other things going on that maybe like my family members and peers and friends did not see or hear. I was pretty much in contact with spiritual beings, and I didn't know who they were, but they seemed very angelic to me. And that was why I actually was interested in becoming a nun, because there seemed to be this presence that was around that was a very loving presence. And I could sometimes hear music that was not playing here. It was kind of just somewhere. It was almost like kind of this angelic music that I would hear every once in a while. I'd have dreams of angels coming to visit me. I could see things that were going to happen sometimes, in kind of like my family environment. And my family was very traditional Italians, first generation Italians. So they had like this passion, they had this kind of belief in spirit and stuff. So when they found out I was psychic, they took me to the racetrack so that I could tell them what horses were going to win. And so that's kind of like one of my fond memories of like how this kind of unfolded with my family. They're actually very supportive, and they really believed that I was. It was not like a negative thing at all. It was like they really saw that there was something there. And I guess being psychic or clairvoyant, you have the sense of what's going on for other people that they themselves don't know. You could see, like, if something was going to be, you could see that they were troubled. You could see I'm not quite sure how to express it. It's such a direct experience. It's almost like you have a sense of somebody's deeper, because we all have this kind of pretense of behavior, right? But when you're psychic or clairvoyant, you see under that. You see what's really going on for a person. If they're sad, if they're grieving, if they're unhappy. And you could see why that's happening. You could see what's going on around them, what their behavior is that's creating any unhappiness. And you could also, what started to happen was there would be like these messages that would come in around people. So I would be able to tell people, there's this message for you that says this. And then eventually, and I was pretty young then too, I was actually, this is a more difficult thing to talk about, but I'll just do the best I can with it. I started like having communications with people that had passed over, people that had died, relatives, and other people as well. And that's pretty much been consistent through my whole life. It never stopped. Like once I was in a store and I was a young adult, and there was this being there that had transitioned, and I guess the wife was in the store, and it was the husband that was talking to me and said, "Can you go over to my wife and give her this message from me?" And I did. And it was true. Her husband had died, and I gave her the message from her husband. And so that thing was pretty common for me. It was kind of a natural thing. For some reason, I was able to talk to people that had passed over. And that's kind of part of a psychic and clairvoyant, I guess, ability, skills. And it always seemed very kind of ordinary to me because it was always there. So does that kind of answer your question, though? I don't know if I answered why I had it. I just knew I had it.
Another question, a follow-up question would be, did you ever take that further? Did you ever have formal training in terms of like psychic ability, or did you mostly always keep it to yourself?
Well, I told my parents about it. My family knew. They were really supportive. And they would sometimes ask me, what do you think is going to happen with this thing? You know, so I don't know if that's training, but I think if you're psychic or clairvoyant or have kind of like past life attainment abilities, I guess you can call them, and you have support, that you have people that aren't telling you it's not true, they're not prejudiced in any way against it, it doesn't scare them, there's just support there, that in itself is enough to help you feel confident about it and feel okay about it. And that's probably the best part, or the best way I was able to feel good about it, feel like, oh, this is something that is not a bad thing. Even though other people didn't have it or other children didn't have it, I didn't feel like there was something wrong with me. And I think that was because of the support of my family. So later on, once I got onto the spiritual path, there was my teacher then, and other teachers I worked with also saw that I had that ability. You could tell if someone has that ability when in the awakening process, as you start to awaken more and more, and as your ego falls away and you're kind of come into this clear light or luminosity where there's a lot more happening that you can see. If you meet someone that is also going through that is awakened to some extent, you can see that immediately. You see it in their eyes, you see it in their presence, you see it in their karma. So once I became an adult and I started on the spiritual path, there were teachers, there were Sangha members that saw that I had it and would come and ask me to do sessions with them, or ask me, what do you think about this, or what's going to happen here, or what's going on a bigger level. And you would just tell them whatever was kind of coming through, and then what it comes through in emotion, feeling. There's kind of like a wisdom, a knowingness. So that was probably more training also, just doing it, just talking to people about it, and people being interested in talking to me about it. And then I started doing more and more formal sessions, which I still do today. Yeah.
Once you landed on the spiritual path, once you started moving in that direction, you found Hinduism. And before the interview, we were just chatting about how my spiritual path started with Buddhism and then shifted a little bit into Hinduism.
Yeah.
And so I would love to hear more about the differences that you found in the two and how they're also similar.
Yeah. I can give you my experience. Other people will have a completely different experience, which I honor. But my experience on more of a Hindu path was, again, through the Bhakti path and the Karma Yoga path. And Bhakti path is very, it can also, I think of it as almost kind of a form of mysticism. The Bhakti path, it's a path of devotion, I think, as we were saying. My experience was I fell in love with Kali, with Durga, with different deities, Brahma, Krishna. And then I started reading about their lives, and particularly about the lives of beings that have been here more recently, like Ramakrishna and Nandi Mayama. And the more I read about them, the more I felt like I was actually connecting with their being, their essence. And there was a deep kind of passion that arose from me that I would call devotion. I just fell in love. And the same thing happened when I read about St. Francis and St. Teresa of Avila. There was just such a deep feeling of wanting to be connected with these beings, and then feeling like I was connected with these beings. And so devotion in Hindu is a very big part of the path. Devotion in Tibetan Buddhism is also a very, very big part of the path. I find that to be extremely similar. In the West, a lot of people approach Tibetan Buddhism as studying and reading a lot of text and doing a lot of practice and ritual. But there's another aspect that is not so popular for Westerners, but is more true for Tibet and Bhutan and Nepal for Tibetan Buddhists there, which is the devotional aspect. And I found the same to be true. When I first came to Crestone, I was doing walks and I was hiking around the mountains, and there's this day that I had a kind of an experience with a being. And I had my camera with me and I took pictures of kind of the mountains. And afterwards, when I kind of looked at the photos that I had taken, I couldn't even see them when I was doing it. The being that I was in contact with actually came through on the photos. Yeah, and I understood that to be Mahakala, that Mahakala, presence of Mahakala, a being that's kind of an emanation of Mahakala, or Mahakala himself, actually is in this mountain. And I had this deep, again, devotional, kind of very like prostrated, bowed down to this amazing protector that I believe protects Crestone and protects this monastery. So in that way, I find Hindu and Tibetan Buddhism to be almost the same. There's that deep devotional aspect that is a catapult that really catapults you into direct experience with very high masters, very high deities, and they're real. And you can experience Buddha lands and heaven states through this devotional. So in that way, I find them to be very close, if not the same. It's just different names for the beings, but pretty much the same beings. And then karma yoga is also a very big aspect of Hindu, which is selfless service. You know that you're doing things for other people and you're not gaining anything. You're not doing it for material gain. You're doing it because it's good to do it. It feels good to do it. And that's a difficult concept for Westerners too. A lot of Westerners want to come into Tibetan Buddhism and just meditate, and do, Vipassana or do some retreat where they're meditating 8 hours a day. But I find that isn't the fastest way to experience self-realization or levels of self-realization. I find the fastest way is to combine your devotional path, your feeling of love for higher beings, and the experience of feeling their love for you. Combine that with selfless service, doing things selflessly for other people, giving people something that's going to support them. And then that experience of selfless service kind of comes back to 100 or a million-fold almost. As soon as you start working towards helping other people, the feeling behind that of I've made a difference in this person's life is so deep, and combined with devotion, it can bring you right into a level of self-realization, something beyond yourself. You get to connect with something beyond yourself. You get to realize that there is something beyond yourself that is actually yourself. And then your personal self isn't really reality. It's something that will eventually fall away if you, move along a spiritual path. So Hindu and Tibetan Buddhism, in those two respects, I found to be the same. Because when I came here, I had done, with my first teacher and other teachers, a lot of selfless service, like hours all day long, was just, you're constantly just doing things for other people. And when I came to this monastery, I brought that here. So I immediately, once I moved here, I just started working in the kitchen. I just started doing things that I knew the monastery needed done. Eventually, I was asked to run the center. That's what I'm doing now. But even from this kind of place of running the center, I keep it in my mind as selfless service. I'm benefiting humanity. So I'd say in those ways, it's pretty much the same path. And then what would be different, I guess, is a good question. Well, the deities are different, right? But the same love and the same direct experience of these great beings that are working towards liberation of sentient beings, and enlightenment for everyone. And then the text is different, the story is different. Of course, in Tibetan Buddhism, you have Buddha Shakyamuni, who was the being that came to Earth to be a model for enlightenment. You could do this too, and here's how. And he gave all the paths, 84,000 paths in his lifetime, laid out all the paths to enlightenment, which you don't really have in Hindu. You have different gods and goddesses and deities, but Buddha Shakyamuni is specific to Tibetan Buddhism, and he laid out the entire path of Tibetan Buddhism. And I find that while Hindu, there's a lot less, for me, it seemed like Hindu had less structure, because in Hindu, a lot of times, you go to see a guru who is enlightened or awake, right? And then you just kind of, a lot of times you renunciate. You say, here's everything I have. Can you give me enlightenment? It's kind of a trade. And they take you on as a teacher. But there's, gurus are very different. They're all different types of beings. And there's no one kind of text or structure that you follow to attain enlightenment. Where in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a lot of checks and balances. It's an unbroken lineage. There are gurus or teachers, and they also are very different and unique, but they're all following certain texts. They're all following a certain structure that was laid out by Buddha Shakyamuni. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear all the similarities. There's a lot more similarities than I had thought.
Yeah.
And also I guess to go a little deeper, have you noticed any differences in like perceptions or things that you might experience in meditation between the two religions? I've noticed if I'm in a Buddhist meditation, I might have visualizations of Buddhist symbols or things like that, versus if it's a Hindu meditation. I've noticed that in my own experience. I'm just curious if you've had that over your long period of meditation and other practices.
Yes, definitely. It's a different methods to attain the same goal. So it could look completely different. In some ways, my Hindu practice looked completely different than my Tibetan Buddhist practice that I do now. All of our practices, our chants, our pujas, our sadhana, I didn't do any of that for my first 20 years on the path. And those practices, they have a life of their own. They're very, very rich, and they do, I think, connect us spiritually, in spirit, with other spirit. And in Tibetan Buddhism also, I found my consciousness expanding in a way that I hadn't experienced in Hindu practice. But also, I think you have to kind of think about when you're on a path, you're creating a foundation, and then you're building on that foundation. So I'm not quite sure if it's that it's so different because I had a strong foundation and then I came into Tibetan Buddhism and start building on that foundation, or that it was just very, very different anyway. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that foundation is really important.
Yeah, it's kind of like your springboard for a lot of these otherworldly experiences that you'll have that will come in that they wouldn't come in unless that foundation was there, I think.
Yeah.
You have to be pretty solid. You can't be ungrounded. You have to be, in Tibetan Buddhism and in Hindu as well, but Tibetan Buddhism, I love the way it's spoken about in books and through teachers. To come into the Tibetan Buddhist practices, there is, I don't know why, maybe, it's such an ancient kind of magic thing that happens with some of the practices that they will bring you to places that you haven't experienced as a human, conditioned human, and you have to be ready for that. So you want to have both for Hindu, I would think for any tradition, any spiritual tradition, you want to have a healthy egoic structure before you go into any type of teachings, especially esoteric or advanced teachings like Vajrayana in Tibetan Buddhism. If you don't, then a healthy egoic structure would be that it's balanced. You have an ego and you consider yourself a person, but you have positive qualities, and you have qualities that are maybe considered more negative qualities or critical qualities, but there's a balance, and if you have too much of the negative qualities, if you have depression, if you have incredibly low self-esteem to the point that you can kind of almost harm yourself or harm others, you're not really ready for practices in Tibetan Buddhism that would kind of again, kind of catapult you into these other dimensions. It wouldn't be beneficial, and it's not going to really support you on a path. So a lot of teachers in Tibetan Buddhism ask that the students, if they have had any level of serious dysfunction, mental dysfunction, that they have therapy first. Yeah. I don't think in Tibet, I don't know how it is now because there's been such a Western influence into, Tibet, Nepal, and Bhutan. So I'm not sure quite how you would describe it now. But I know when Buddhism was first coming to the West, it was only about 60 years ago, they didn't have mental illness in those areas like we do here. Yeah, and that is a big difference. That it's very different for a Westerner that has had a lifetime of dysfunction or abuse or negative conditioning to come into a Tibetan Buddhist environment and start working through the teachings and through the sadhanas than it is for someone that's from Bhutan or Nepal or Tibet or India. I think having that kind of healthy mental outlook on the world is very key to being able to progress on a spiritual path. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very practical advice for people. Seek therapy first, make sure you're in a good egoic mind before seeking the more advanced practices. Don't jump right in. Mm-hmm. Do you have any other advice for somebody who is just beginning, is just interested, or may have just found Buddhism or Hinduism or any of the other pathways? Mm-hmm. Do you have any other advice for those type of people?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, because once you've kind of come through that yourself, there's certain things that you've experienced that you would kind of say, well, here's the dead ends I found, so you wouldn't have to go through these. I would recommend this. I think what I would tell people is from the start, don't become overly focused on the text and the sadhanas and the intellectual. Don't over-intellectualize Tibetan Buddhism. Take time to, volunteer at a hospital or volunteer at a nursing home. Do things that might not even seem like they're part of Tibetan Buddhism. Do things that are selfless. Do things that it requires you to step outside of yourself and put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and think about what they're going through and the pain they may have or the suffering they may have. Be open to the suffering of others so that you can help alleviate their suffering. That will quicken your own path to an enormous degree, in my view, as well as the level of devotion. A lot of people take texts and books and they start reading about these different methods in Tibetan Buddhism, but all of those methods are kind of built on the devotion and having that deep connection to a teacher, to a Tibetan Buddhist Lama. And then that relationship allows the Lama to offer oral instructions, and those oral instructions in themselves have a certain kind of ability to open your heart and to open your mind. So a lot of people want to jump over that. I hear it all the time from people that come here and people I also counsel. I don't need a teacher. I don't want a teacher. I could do this on my own. That's a very immature attitude. And later, as you do start having some self-realization, you do have the realization of that. So right at the beginning, I would say if you're thinking like that, really inquire about that thinking. That thinking isn't really helpful. in the West, we feel we need to be so independent, and we don't live in an independent universe. We live in an interdependent universe. And the sooner that we can realize that, the quicker our own path will be, I think. So probably those two things the most.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that is beautiful advice, really helpful for people. It's that selfless service and the devotion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it makes a huge difference.
So we jumped into clairvoyance and that type of thing. And then I was also curious about dreams and how important dreams are to you, and if you've had any certain dreams and how much weight you put into your own dreams.
That is a great question. That's a very big question, because there's so many different levels of dream states. There's the dream state of just from the conditioned mind, which is whatever can be bothering you subconsciously might come up in your dream, right? And so then you could kind of, upon waking, well, for me, I'll speak about my direct experience. There's certain things like I'll wake up and I'll have had a dream, and I'll recognize in the dream certain things that were troubling me that I wasn't really clear about that are now clear because I've had a dream where they just it just arose that way. They became kind of like the display of my life, shined light on these certain things that I couldn't ignore, that they were troubling me. So there's that type of dream. Before I came here, I was living in California, and it was the end of my 19 years kind of on my Hindu path and with the teachers I was working on. And I kind of had this deep experience of feeling like I didn't want to have a personal life anymore. Whatever I did from that point on was going to be for the benefit of all people, and I just was interested in how I could help. I felt like I had wasted a lot of time, and I hadn't started soon enough on my path, and I wanted to just give back. And I had a dream, and in the dream, the Dalai Lama came to me, and he told me to move to Colorado and come to a monastery, and he showed me kind of this symbol. It was like a mandala. And he said, here, this is going to help you. So kind of I looked at that and focused on that. And I had like this picture in my mind of this kind of mandala thing. And then he told me, you need to go within the next 3 days or 4 days, whatever it was. And he said, if you wait too long, this window is going to close. It was so specific. It was just this incredible experience. It was all in the dream state. And then I woke up from that, and I just did exactly what he said. I flew to Colorado. It was like the next day or something. I flew here. I had somehow, this monastery is kind of, not very well known, but when I kind of Googled monasteries in Colorado, it came up. So who knows why. And I came here, and the mandala he was talking about was in the shrine room. And then I thought, okay, so I'm in the right place. And then just from then on, everything that has unfolded here has felt like just a gift that I was given. I didn't feel like I worked towards anything. I just came here, I had no expectation, and every single thing that's happened since has been kind of given, I felt, to me through grace or God or Mahakala or deities of this lineage, or Rinpoche, or the root guru of this lineage is Kenshin Trungpa Rinpoche, who passed on last June, and I had been able to meet him and spend a little bit of time with him in the first 7 years, first 3 or 4 years really, that I was here, and he helped confirm for me a lot of the things that were said in that dream, actually. It was pretty amazing. So I think there are times where, if a being can't come to you directly in the waking state, they can come to you in the dream state where you're more lucid. There's more kind of a luminosity, and you're not as hooked into samsara, this world. And that did definitely happen to me. And I would say I've seen it happen to other people, and they've told me things that they've dreamt about that were kind of either guidance or prophesizing something or giving them a direction. So I do think dreams are important, and beings can come to you, your own guides and deities, people from your past lives that are still connected with you. They can come in and give you guidance. So I do think they're valuable. And then I think the other aspect of dreams is to dismiss the dreams that are kind of, just your own spinning personal mind. Because just like we have our spinning mind in the world, we're living here, and a lot of what's going on is just our mind telling us what's going on. It's a narrative. Our mind's telling us what happened to us in the past, and it's usually very inaccurate because we see through filters, and we have a conditioned mind. It's subjective. And a lot of what we're experiencing is also fears that we have, so we need to project in the future and make plans so we feel safe. So those same things come up in dreams. So I think it's important to understand that if we're, doing an inquiry of the mind, understanding the nature of the mind, it's important to understand the nature of the mind in the dream state as well. What to discard, what to dismiss, what to not listen to.
That is a good point. Make sure you're thinking about your mind in terms of, you very much could have a monkey mind in your dream state. Exactly. As much as in the conscious waking state.
Yeah, because that's pretty much what's going on for most of us here, is that our mind is pretty much torturing us. And, even in Tibetan Buddhism, the first noble truth is that the samsaric life is a life of suffering, pretty much, right? But the samsaric life is coming from the mind. It's not actually out there. It's only here inside us, right? It's our mind that is telling us what's wrong or what's right, or what to judge, or what to pursue, or what to push away. And that entire experience is the experience of samsara, is the experience of our conditioning that has affected our ability to see things clearly.
Yeah, and on that same topic of mind, Buddhism seems like it's very, very much concerned with exploration of the mind in order to solve some of the problems we deal with anxiety and unhappiness and things like that. Can you speak more to that exploration of the mind and how one might approach starting to explore their mind if they're so unfamiliar with it?
Yeah, I think what you just said is one, if not the most important aspect of Tibetan Buddhism, and any spiritual path, true spiritual path that is trying to create liberation for a person, for a student. I think that I kind of want to keep it a little bit condensed because we could talk for hours on this topic. In my first 20 years on kind of that bhakti, devotional and karma yogic path that I was on, there were a lot of spiritual experiences. It was all direct experience. So I started having experience of otherworldly realms and speaking to these great beings. But there was not an understanding of, it just seemed like I transcended the mind and went to these other places. So there was not really an inquiry of the nature of mind during that time. It just seemed like my personality was falling away on its own. I wasn't really doing anything to unravel it. A little bit maybe, but more broadly speaking, my path wasn't an inquiry of mind path. But when I came into Tibetan Buddhism, when I came to Crestone, when I came into this path, I became very interested in nature of mind. And in Tibetan Buddhism, one very large aspect of the path is at some point you're going to want to understand how your mind works. Because then that will allow you to become master of your own mind. Instead of it controlling you, you will be able to control the mind itself. And at the point that you can control your mind or the mind, you become the manifester of your life, rather than things just kind of arising around you and you're not really sure why they're there or what caused them to be there. and you're constantly in this relationship with your life where you're trying to change things or you're unhappy with things, right? So in Tibetan Buddhism, to understand how the mind works changes all of that. Your life becomes a display, a reflection of a wisdom, a greater knowledge, a greater wisdom. We can get into so much. This is such a large topic, but I guess the important thing for me to understand about nature of mind is we come in with a personal mind, right? And our personal mind is largely conditioned by our life, by our peers, by everything that's happening to us. But it's also, in Tibetan Buddhist view, largely a result of karma. All the things that we've done in our past lives, there's karmic ripening. So a lot of things that are going on in this life are a result of things that have happened in choices we've made and actions we've done in previous lives, right? So all of that is kind of combined to create a certain way we look at the world, a certain view. And very often that view is more of a selfish view, because intrinsic in our conditioned personal nature is the desire to be happy. So most of our life is spent pursuing things that we think are going to make us happy, or pushing away things that we think will not make us happy. But that is completely built on a very subjective and conditioned outlook. So the point of Tibetan Buddhism, part of what we're trying to do, is remove all the filters, all the personal and environmental conditions, so that you could actually see what's really happening. And there is no longer that personal desire for happiness in the same way that there was before. Does that kind of feel like it makes sense?
Yeah, I think it makes sense a lot. I would like to go a little deeper with it as well. And I've heard these terms described as, you're speaking to the personal mind, and I've also heard of the wisdom mind.
Yeah.
And so how can one determine which one is speaking?
Yeah. They're very distinct. When you were kind of like, oh, I want this new car, and I want all these different parts of my life to look like this. It's easy to know that's personal, right? Because it's about me. What I want, what my world is supposed to look like so that I can be happy. And we're so conditioned, particularly in the West, to think happiness is based on material gain. There's such a connection to our external worlds. So we're driven with these thoughts in our personal mind about, like, go after this, go after that, push this away, you don't want this, you don't like this person, and it just goes on and on all day long. It's constantly telling us all the things that we like and don't like and what to do about that, right? The wisdom mind isn't interested in assessing anything. It's not going to tell us, dislike this person, yell at this person, be mean to this person. It's going to be kind of more a knowingness in our heart that is so much built on unconditional love. So there's just kind of a love that is there that we recognize as ourselves, and we recognize that same love is inside every other person that we meet. So there's always that connection of, this person is like me. There's a connection with this person. They're not the enemy. They're not somebody that I have to be threatened by. They're not somebody that I should be jealous of. There's something called poisons in Tibetan Buddhism, which is, pride, jealousy, and all the emotions that come out of these kind of poisons, prejudice, discrimination, hate, lust. They're kind of considered negative qualities, I would imagine, by Western standards. But in Tibetan Buddhism, they're looked at very closely when we do an inquiry of the mind. And we're asked to discover, where are these coming from? Where's your jealousy coming from? Where's your anger coming from? Where's your rage coming from? Where's your arrogance coming from? Your pride? Where are these things coming from? Why are they influencing you? Why do you believe in jealousy? Because a lot of people, if they feel jealous, they don't distinguish that's just a feeling or that's just coming from a thought. They identify with the emotion or the thought of it, and it's like they are that. But in Tibetan Buddhism, you realize you're not that. It's just a thought. It's just an emotion. It's not who you really are. So you start creating more space from those things. And once you kind of start moving along the path, it's very easy to see when jealousy comes up or pride or anything that is understandably harmful, that's not something that's wisdom. That's something that has come from conditioning or a wound or something that has happened to us in our life or past life. Wisdom mind is more, you can see things that are going on, and and you're not identified with it as meaningful to yourself personally, and it's also shown to you so that you can help support or do something about it to benefit humanity. So there's that distinct difference in feeling of, personal mind's telling me to do something because it'll make people like me better, right? Well, has nothing to do with wisdom mind. Wisdom mind isn't interested in the personal, in your personal. And you don't even feel like wisdom coming in is personal. It feels very impersonal, actually.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I had an idea that might be the case,
Yeah.
but it does help to hear.
Yeah.
And along that same line, I'm curious about how you define awakening, and is awakening and enlightenment dissolution of the mind completely, where it just goes away?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a term where me personally, I get a little fearful of not having the mind to fall back on. So.
Right. I think, kind of connected with what we were just speaking about, the wisdom mind is yourself. So you're not going from like having a personal mind to just being kind of floating around in space with kind of a feeling of just awareness. There is a personal aspect in the awakening process, but it's personal in a more beautiful way, I guess. It's all about love, really. It's all about, what's described when a lot of people have NDEs, near-death experiences, and they describe going to these states, these other realms, where there's just like compassion and kindness, and there's no negative emotions, there's no negative qualities. And I would say that's more true of an awakened state. It's like that happens as we awaken. And awakening itself, there's levels of it. And right now, I think we've talked about that because we're kind of doing a series of what is awakening, because there's so many different definitions of it, right? I would say awakening is this shift of perspective, of perception. Your view of the world changes. It moves from a personal, what's in it for me view to a, what can I do for other people view. I think that's a pivotal place on the path. When we're able to get out of ourselves enough to look and see and feel what's happening for the greater population, for humanity, that shift is a shift of awakening. And we become less interested in our own personal projects or aspirations or pursuits. And that also opens the door to a lot of much more vast spiritual experiences. So I think awakening, there's different levels. And there is, I think, once we really have that shift to being interested in helping rather than just serving ourselves, serving others, there becomes almost a domino effect, and the ability for our minds to kind of fall away. It's not even like we have to try. It's almost that starts happening on its own, because we're no longer putting so much attention on ourselves, and we become what our attention goes to, right? We are what our attention is in some ways. We become what we focus on. So we're focusing on other people and doing good things and being a light in the world, then we become a light in the world, and we become expanded, we become vaster, we become connected with a much bigger picture. We go from it being earthly beings to universal beings, I think, is a good way. And you can feel it inside, and you can see it, and you know your perspective has changed.
I also wanted to chat about compassion. Compassion is such a foundational Buddhist teaching. And in my own life, I felt it to be pretty distant, and I might attribute it to like they just didn't teach me in school. But I would like to hear what your definition of compassion is, and why it is such a foundational approach in Buddhism.
Yeah. In Buddhism, we call it bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is compassion, but it's other things also. There's not a perfect translation for it. I think love and compassion is, more of a direct experience of feeling what other people feel, and feeling what other people feel to the extent that it's you also. So that if you're suffering and I see you and meet you and know you and I feel you're suffering, I realize that that's my suffering too. You're no longer separating yourself from other people and saying, well, that's their problem, or that's their suffering, or that's their pain. It's like whatever's happening for other people is happening for you too. And I think that's a good way to understand what compassion really is. It's not pitying or feeling sorry for somebody. It's really feeling what they're feeling and understanding, having compassion. You have like a certain feeling of love for them because you feel what they're feeling, and you would like that to not be there for them, but it is there for them. So you can join them in that and possibly help them without pushing them away. You embrace them rather than pushing them away. I think that's kind of almost the ultimate compassion, is to understand that we are part of everyone else. Everyone else is a part of ours too. That no one's suffering is not our suffering. And that helps put everything in perspective and to help understand how we can help. I think that's very needed. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like that selfless service could be a great way of cultivating that compassion. Mm-hmm. That's how it feels like to me, where if you do volunteer or put yourself in those situations where suffering's so prevalent, then that compassion just goes hand in hand, I feel like.
Yeah. So often when here, of course, people that come here because they are wanting to have refuge. They're wanting to escape from their crazy world. And one of the things that I've sometimes said to people is, we'll take care of you. And for some people to hear someone say, I'll take care of you, I've seen people start crying when I said that, because they just have felt so alone, and to feel like someone actually cares. They don't want anything from me. They just care. There's no exchange here. They're certainly from a place of giving and not wanting anything from me. I think we live in a world where we're almost kind of on guard when we are with other people or meeting other people, because we expect that they're going to want something from us. If they're going to ask something of us, or they want to give us something, but it's in exchange for something, and that's a very difficult way, I think, to, it's difficult culturally for us in the West. Everything's becoming so Western now. I was in Nepal in the fall, and you could just see the West, the Western influence bleeding in so much. There's good aspects of that, but it's also, it kind of is a veil to compassion. I think it's more difficult for people to feel compassion when they have more of that capitalist material view.
Yeah, I felt that in daily experience. Like, what is this transaction? Like, am I going to get ripped off? Do you want me to like sign something? Like, what is it? And it is very prevalent, and I become super aware of it when it's the opposite, and when it's actually just a interaction of presence and compassion. It's very strong, and you just pick it up immediately. And so I think it's a beautiful thing to work toward that.
Yeah, I think so too. And in my own life as well, if people in friends, or even people I don't know, even strangers that are kind to me, you just have that feeling of immediately acknowledging, wow, this person just cares. There's just kindness here. It's just incredible.
To end the podcast, I like to do this special thing where I'd like to invite you to look into the camera directly and offer a prayer, or maybe just a piece of advice to somebody who is watching and has watched the whole episode through, and maybe they can receive something genuine from that.
What I would share is what I would have wanted someone to share with me before I started the spiritual path. And one of the most important things I think to realize, especially early on the path, is that all of these things that we may be feeling about ourselves, lack of self-worth, a feeling that we don't have value or are unvalued, or we don't value ourselves, feelings of lack, those feelings don't exist in higher realities. They exist here in this kind of earth plane place that we're experiencing right now. But I have found for myself, and everyone that I know that is awakening has also found this to be true, that if we have those feelings, we can dismiss them. We can disregard them. These thoughts that are telling us we're not enough, or there's something wrong with us, or there's something to fix, the greatest benefit we can gift to ourselves is to ignore those thoughts. And if we ignore them for long enough, they'll go away. They'll start quieting down. And that really is the start of a true spiritual path, where our spirit is arising out of the chaos of our cluttered minds that really don't know what's going on most of the time, and are not guiding us to find our true selves, our true God selves, and our true unconditional ability to love that self. Good luck to everyone. And thank you, Eric. You're amazing. You're such a light.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for all of your wisdom and sharing all of your wisdom. I'm so grateful that we were able to do this, and that you were willing and invited me over here to experience this profound retreat and get to hear your wisdom. And where could people learn more about you, or find, maybe if they wanted to book a session or something, where could they find you?
We have a website called Ani Lodro Retreats, and people can go there and see a couple of videos that I've put out recently. Some of them are reading passages from some of the texts that we're doing teachings on right now. There's a guided meditation. There is short talks about certain aspects of the path that I think are very helpful to remember. And people can write me from there, contact us through there, or book a session, I think, through there. There's email also, Ani Lodro Retreats. Is that our email? AniLodroRetreats@gmail.com? Okay. That's our email address, so people can contact us through there also.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. It's just been such a pleasure. And thank you so much.